Hi everyone, welcome back to Pages of the Globe. Today I'm going to be reading to you the short story All of Summer in a Day by Ray Bradbury. Like always, before we start, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the author and then we're going to jump straight into the story. So, Ray Bradbury was born on August 22nd, 1920 and died on June 5th, 2012. He was an American author and screenwriter and one of the most celebrated 20th century American writers. He worked in a variety of modes, including fantasy, science fiction, horror, mystery, and realistic fiction. He wrote many works and is widely known by the general public for his novel, which you may have even read, Fahrenheit 451, and his short story collections, The Martian Chronicles and The Illustrated Man. Most of his best-known work is speculative fiction, but he also worked in other genres, such as the coming-of-age novel Dandelion Wine, which he published in 1957, and the fictionalized memoir Green Shadows, White Whale, which he published in 1992. He also wrote and consulted on screenplays and television scripts, including Moby Dick and It Came Out of Outer Space. Many of his works were adapted in television and film productions, as well as comic books. Additionally, Ray Bradbury wrote poetry and published several collections of his poems, such as They Have Not Seen the Stars in 2001. The New York Times even called Bradbury the writer most responsible for bringing modern science fiction into the literary mainstream. As for the story we will be reading today, All of Summer in a Day, it is incredibly popular. You may have even heard of it. It is widely taught in schools, and I'm very excited to share it with you. Without further ado, let's get on with the story. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and please comment down below which short story you would like to hear next. That way, I can read stories that you actually want to hear. All Summer in a Day by Ray Bradbury. Ready? Ready. Now? Soon. Do the scientists really know? Will it happen today, will it? Look, see for yourself. The children pressed to each other like so many roses, so many weeds, intermixed, peering out for a look at the hidden sun. It rained. It had been raining for 7 years, thousands upon thousands of days compounded and filling from one end to the other with rain, with a sweet drum and gush of water, with a sweet crystal fall of showers, and the concussion of storms so heavy they were tidal waves come over the island. 1,000 forests had been crushed under the rain and grown up 1,000 times to be crushed again. And this was the way of life was forever on the planet Venus. And this was a schoolroom of children, of the rocket men and women who had come to a raining world to set up civilization and live out their lives. It's stopping! Yes! Margot stood apart from them. From these children who couldn't even remember a time where there wasn't rain and rain and rain. They were all 9 years old, and if there had been a day 7 years ago when the sun came out for an hour and showed its face to the stunned world, they could not recall. Sometimes at night she heard them stir in remembrance, and she knew they were dreaming and remembering gold or a yellow crayon or a coin large enough to buy the world with. She knew they thought they remembered a warmness, like a blushing in the face, in the body, in the arms and legs and trembling hands. But then they always awoke to the tatting drum, the endless shaking down of clear bead necklaces upon the roof, the walk, the gardens, the forests, and their dreams were gone. All day yesterday they had read in class about the sun, about how like a lemon it was, and how hot. And they had all written small stories or essays about the poem about it. I think the sun is a flower that blooms for just 1 hour. That was Margot's poems, read in a quiet voice in the still classroom while the rain was falling outside. Aw, you didn't write that, protested one of the boys. I did, said Margot, I did. William, said the teacher, but that was yesterday. Now the rain was slackening, and the children were crushed in the great thick windows. Where's the teacher? She'll be back. She'd better hurry. We'll miss it. They turned on themselves like feverish wheel, all tumbling spokes. Margot stood alone. She was a very frail girl who looked as if she had been lost in the rain for years, and the rain had washed out the blue from her eyes, the red from her mouth, and the yellow from her hair. She was an old photograph dusted from an album, whitened away, and if she spoke at all, her voice would be a ghost. Now she stood separate, staring at the rain and the loud, wet world beyond the huge glass. "What are you looking at?" said William. Margot said nothing. "Speak when you're spoken to." He gave her a shove, but she did not move. Rather, she let herself be moved only by him and nothing else. They edged away from her. They would not look at her. She felt them go away. And this was because she would play no games with them in the echoing tunnels of the underground city. If they tagged her and ran, she stood blinking after them and did not follow. When the classroom sang songs about happiness and life and games, her lips barely moved. Only when they sang about the sun and the summer did her lips move as she watched the drenched windows. And then, of course, the biggest crime of all was that she had came here only 5 years ago from Earth, and she remembered the sun and the way the sun was and the sky was and where she was when she was 4. And they had only been on Venus all their lives, and they had only been 2 years old when last the summer came out, and had long since forgotten the color and the heat of it, and the way it really was. But Margot remembered. "It's like a penny," she said once, eyes closed. "No, it's not," the children cried. "It's like a fire in the stove." "You're lying, you don't remember," cried the children. But she remembered and stood quietly apart from all of them and watched the pattering windows. And once, a month ago, she had refused to shower in the school shower rooms, had clutched her hands to her ears, and over her head was screaming that the water mustn't touch her head. So after that, dimly, she sensed it. She was different, and they knew her difference and kept away from her. There was talk that her father and mother were taking her back to Earth next year. It seemed vital to her that they do so, though it would mean the loss of thousands of dollars to her family. And so, the children hated her for all these reasons, big and little consequence. They hated her pale snow face, her waiting silence, her thinness, her possible future. The boy gave her another shove. "What are you waiting for?" Then, for the first time, she turned and looked at him, and what she was waiting for was in her eyes. "Well, don't wait around here," cried the boy savagely. "You won't see nothing." Her lips moved. "Nothing," he cried. "It was all a joke, wasn't it?" He turned to the other children. "Nothing's happening today, is it?" They all blinked at him, and then understanding, laughing, shook their heads. "Nothing." "Oh, but," Margot whispered, her eyes helpless, "but this is the day. The scientists predict. They say they know the sun." "All a joke," said the boy and seized her roughly. "Hey, everybody, let's put her in the closet before the teacher comes." "No," said Margot, falling back. They surged about her, caught her up, and bore her, protesting, and then pleading, and then crying, back into a tunnel, a room, a closet, where they slammed and locked the door. They stood looking at the door and saw it tremble from her beating and throwing herself against it. They heard her muffled cries. Then, smiling, they turned and went out and back down the tunnel just as the teacher arrived. "Ready, children?" She glanced at her watch. "Yes," said everyone. "Are we all here?" "Yes." The rain slacked still more. They crowded to the huge door. The rain stopped. It was as if, in the midst of a film concerning an avalanche, a tornado, a hurricane, a volcanic eruption, something had first gone wrong with the sound of apparatus, thus muffling and finally cutting off all the noise, all the blasts and repercussions and thunder, and then second ripped the film from the projector and inserted in its place a beautiful tropical slide, which did not move or tremor. The world ground to a standstill. The silence was so immense and unbelievable that you felt your ears had been stuffed or you had lost your hearing altogether. The children put their hands to their ears. They stood apart. The door slid back, and the smell of the silent, waiting world came into them. The sun came out. It was the color of flaming bronze, and it was very large, and the sky around them was just blazing blue tile color. And the jungle burned with sunlight as the children, released from their spell, rushed out yelling into the springtime. "Now don't go too far," called the teacher after them. "You only got 2 hours, you know. You wouldn't want to get caught out." But they were running and turning their faces up to the sky and feeling the sun on their cheeks like a warm iron. They were taking off their jackets and letting the sun burn their arms. Oh, it's better than the sun lamps, isn't it? Much, much better. They stopped running and stood in the great jungle that covered Venus, that grew and never stopped growing, tumultuously, even as you watched it. It was a nest of octopi, clustering up in great arms of flesh like weed, wavering and flowering in this brief spring. It was the color of rubber and ash, this jungle, from the many years without sun. It was the color of stones and white cheeses and ink, and it was the color of the moon. The children lay out, laughing on the jungle mattress, and heard it sigh and squeak under them, resilient and alive. They ran among the trees. They slipped and fell. They pushed each other. They played hide and seek and tag. But most of all, they squinted at the sun until tears ran down their faces. They put their hands up to that yellowness and that amazing blueness, and they breathed the fresh air and listened to the silence which suspended them in a blessed sea of no sound and no motion. They looked at everything, savored everything. Then wildly, like animals, escaped from their caves. They ran in shouting circles. They ran for an hour and did not stop running, and then, in the midst of all their sunning, one of the girls wailed. Everyone stopped. The girl standing in the open held out her hand. "Oh, look, look!" They came slowly and looked at her opened hand. In the center, cupped and huge, was a single raindrop. She began to cry, looking at it. They glanced quietly at the sun. Oh. A few cold drops fell on their noses and their cheeks and their mouths. The sun faded behind a stir of mist. A wind blew cold around them. They turned and started to walk back towards the underground house, their hands at their sides, their smiles vanishing away. A boom of thunder startled them, and like leaves before a new hurricane, they tumbled upon each other and ran. Lightning struck, 10 miles away, 5 miles away, a mile, a half mile. The sky darkened into midnight in a flash. They stood in the doorway of the underground for a moment until it was raining hard. Then they closed the door and heard the gigantic sound of the rain falling in tons and avalanches, everywhere and forever. Will it be 7 more years? Yes, 7. Then one of them gave a little cry. "Margot!" "What?" "She's still in the closet where we locked her." Margot. They stood as if someone had driven them, like so many stakes, into the floor. They looked at each other and then looked away. They glanced out at a world that was raining now, and raining steadily. They couldn't meet each other's glances. Their faces were solemn and pale. They looked at their hands and feet, their faces down. Margot. One of the girls said, "Well?" No one moved. "Go on," whispered the girl. They walked slowly down the hall in the sound of cold rain. They turned through the doorway to the room in the sound of the storm and thunder, lightning on their faces, blue and terrible. They walked over to the closet door slowly and stood by it. Behind the closet door was only silence. They unlocked the door even more slowly and let Margot out. The end. All right, so that was All Summer in a Day. Before we start, like always, I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about the book, and then we're going to jump straight into the actual story and analysis. Before we start, I also want to point out, in case I ever said all of summer in a day, that is completely my bad. It is all summer in a day. I just keep thinking it's all of summer in a day because to me that makes more sense. But anyway, All Summer in a Day is a 1954 short story by Ray Bradbury. It's set on Venus, where the sun only comes out once every 7 years for a couple hours, and for the rest of the time, the sun is completely hidden behind the clouds, and rain is just constantly falling. All Summer in a Day is about a group of school children who have kind of grown up on Venus, and they're the sons and daughters of quote-unquote rocket men and women who came to the planet from Earth, as the children prepared to experience the first summer on Venus that they can actually remember. Many of Ray Bradbury's stories, like I said before, are allegorical and carry other meanings which kind of lurk beneath the surface of the story, and All the Summer in a Day is kind of one of those. Before we come to the actual analysis, however, it might be helpful to kind of just recap the plot. So one of these school children is this pale, thin girl named Margot, and she's kind of treated differently because she can actually remember the sun, since she grew up and came to Venus 5 years ago when she was 4. The other children were all born on Venus and were kind of too young to remember the sun last time it appeared, which was 7 years ago. So obviously they're not really going to remember it. They were very young. Now, when they're watching the rainstorms kind of gradually abating and watching for the appearance of the sun, the children talk to each other. And when Margot tells them that the sun is like a penny, or well, she kind of told them that before, but they're just kind of bullying her again. And then William kind of just exclaims that it's just some kind of prank, and he doesn't even think the sun is going to come out. Now, all these children kind of turn on her, and they decide to lock her in a closet at the end of the tunnel. And once the sun comes out, they're let out to play, and they're like really happy, and they're just enjoying their time in the sunshine. But while all of this is happening, they completely forget about Margot. However, the hour soon passes, and one of the girls feels kind of raindrop on her hand, and they all have to go back indoors. That's when they remember that they locked Margot in the closet, and they have to come and let her out. Now, all of Summer in a Day basically just depicts a world without sun. So Venus is just kind of this pale world because everything is deprived of sunlight. So what Ray Bradbury kind of tries to do in this story is show this rain-soaked world effectively by making us as readers first share the excitement of the children as they wait for the sun to make its rare appearance. Now, as I said before, this story is allegorical, which means that there is some sort of symbolism behind it. But it is very subtle and it might come off as a children's novel at first. But like the sun in the story and its effect on children, it goes to work on us as readers in ways which we may not fully realize. One of the things that can take us by surprise upon reading the story is the swift change of the character of the children, especially William, who's kind of like the queen bee. Before the sun appears, they're like very sullen and irritable, and they're very obviously just bullying Margot, because she's the only one that can really remember what the sun looks like, so they're jealous of her. But when they finally return from their brief time among the sunshine, they appear to be like almost remorseful and guilty, because now they've actually had the experience of being out in the sun, and they are guilty of depriving her of that opportunity. The implication of this ending, then, is that the sun is basically just us being able to go out in nature and appreciate it, which is good for us as human beings. But the constant rainstorms on Venus have deprived the children of this experience. Bradbury often kind of remarked about how he thought that we needed fresh air and open countryside and a close relationship with nature, and his stories were all full of warnings about what can go wrong when human beings come to depend too much on technology and are deprived of this bond with the natural world and the open air. As soon as the children have actually been exposed to the healing powers of nature for even just, 1 or 2 hours, they already appear to recover their conscience and empathy, and they very much regret depriving Margot of this experience. Even as I read this story, I felt incredibly bad for Margot, because while I am the kind of person that wouldn't really want to go out, I am definitely more of an indoors person, and if I am going out, then I would like it to be like freezing cold or raining, because I am a very much winter fall kind of person. But I can't even imagine not going out in the sun. And it is very much true, and there have been so many studies done as well, that there are healing powers of nature. Just going out in the sun, soaking up some vitamin D is great. And while they themselves say that they have like sun lamps or something, they are nothing obviously compared to the actual sun. And so this story is just kind of an allegory for maybe instead of constantly like putting kids on, I wouldn't necessarily say mobiles and stuff, because again, this was made in 1954, but let's not rely too heavily on whatever technology is coming up, and let's kind of go out to the countryside, maybe not just stay in cities all the time, and let our kids enjoy nature and experience it. Anyway, that's it for today. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment down below what short story you would like to read next.